You're listening to the YWAM Nashville podcast. My name's Cody.
My name's Michael, and we'll be your hosts for this season.
Bob Saget.
Bob Saget.
Clap for Bob Saget. Hey, millions of listeners out there. Welcome to episode 10
What's up, guys?
of YWAM Nashville podcast.
Oh, yeah.
I probably pronounced that P a little harder than necessary.
That's okay. You got your hosts here, Michael and Cody. And today we have special guest, Michael Lindberg.
Oh, hey.
How you doing, sir?
I'm so glad to be here. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, guys. I just want to thank you for having me. I'm honored to be a guest.
It's great. It's good to have you.
Welcome. I've been working really hard at making this episode the best.
Yeah. So we just wanted to give a little background on Michael, since you guys have absolutely never met him before. He's been a part of YWAM for 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And just 5 years.
High five on that.
High five.
I know you guys can't see where you're listening from, but we just high-fived through the air.
Yep. It was glorious. And he's married to his wife, Alina.
Beautiful wife, Alina.
He's actually my second cousin.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, he has a passion for...
But she's not your second cousin, is
No,
she?
well, she's my second cousin-in-law.
Yeah, I mean,
no,
I
I
guess
was saying
technically.
Michael.
Oh, no.
Because
No.
that would be awkward.
No, yeah,
Just
that'd be weird.
Slightly.
Just a little bit.
I did almost date her second cousin.
Yeah.
Never mind.
But we won't get into that. Delete this part, please.
Another time. Yep. And he's all about intimacy with the Lord. And he's also walked through a season of struggling with deconstruction, which we'll get into in a bit. But he's really passionate about helping people to navigate that
Wait. I have a dad
in a
joke.
healthy way. Oh, wow.
To share prematurely.
All right.
You said he's been working on...
Premature detonation.
No, you said something about deconstruction, but I have a joke about construction.
All right.
Oh, man.
I just haven't got it all figured out yet.
He's still working on it. He's still working on
That's it.
Oh.
Mm.
I was like, yeah, and
it.
yeah.
Oh, man.
Thanks for helping me finish that joke.
There it is.
You bet.
There it is.
People are still wondering when the punchline's coming.
Yeah. They're like, any second now. So things are a little crazy. We're doing like 2 episodes a week and having to like leave for a week for various things. So anyways, long story short, we just recorded episode 9 yesterday and we don't really have any new news for you.
Yep. So
instead, we're going to go with our backup plan where we occasionally will showcase a YWAM value in place of our current events, which we should probably just rename like semi-current events or current events 2 weeks ago.
Well, in a podcast, they won't be current if somebody listens to it a year from now anyways.
Yeah, that's
Well,
true.
it would still be current for that episode, so.
Yeah. But anyways, we wanted to do so YWAM value number 3 is hear God's voice. So take that away, Mr. Co-host, sir. Or yeah.
Well, you did email me something that has the official description. All right. YWAM value number 3, hear God's voice. YWAM is committed to creating with God through listening to Him, praying His prayers, and obeying His commands in matters great and small. We are dependent upon hearing His voice as individuals, together in team context, and in larger corporate gatherings as an integral part of our process for decision making. Woo!
So good.
So what does all that mean in
Well,
summation?
Break it down now.
means just what it said.
And it said what it meant.
Well, I mean, there's lots of even Christians out there in the world that are naysayers.
Say nay.
They would say nay, not ni, but nay to the idea of God still speaking today. I don't know what those people would be called. just naysayers. We'll just call them naysayers. But they would say that God's stopped speaking like with the scriptures.
When the Bible was bound, so was God.
When the first stitch, the last of the first. Anyways. But this morning I was reading in Hebrews, and it says in there, it was talking, I think in Hebrews 3, I believe, maybe 4, because I know it talks about rest, but it was talking about that the Hebrews did not enter God's rest because they didn't hear his voice. And it says, see to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking today.
Yeah.
And I was like, how do you confuse today with any other time?
Yeah.
Like,
well, you could argue they were saying literally in that moment. Yeah. But
I don't know why that would ever change. Like, why would you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I'm just saying.
But like God's character was like speaking throughout since like creation into Jesus' time. I can't think of any verses that would be like, all right, God's just done speaking now.
Yeah. And I think I looked up the tense on that at one point and can't remember all the details, but it was something like a progressive tense. Like him who...
Like now and going forward kind of
He who is speaking and will continue to speak.
Yeah.
Something like a present progressive tense, I think.
Yeah. Sounds right.
I should have studied Hebrew literature more.
As should we all.
Or Greek or whatever. So that's something that we definitely value in Youth with a Mission is like anytime I've questioned like some sort of rule or policy that's been put in place, I'm like, why do we do this? It usually comes down to the fact that, we prayed about it and felt like God said this is what you're supposed to do, and so now we do that. And I'm like, good answer.
Yeah.
No further questions.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we honestly value a lot, and sometimes it can get a little bit annoying because sometimes you can feel like you have the right answer to what you need to do, and someone's like, maybe we should pray about that, and you're like, I just want to go.
You think I'm incompetent?
Yeah. But it's so important, and I've heard God speak on so many various things that I would have in my own common sense declared this is the way we should go, and God says, no, I think you should march around the walls 7 times, and on the 7th time blow a trumpet and shout.
Of course.
And then this shall be your battle strategy, and you will take the town. And it's like, that doesn't sound very wise, but we shall do it. And what do you know?
Literally,
Jericho's walls come down.
Point being, it looks stupid and pointless to us. So you can't just go on what's wise is God's voice.
Yeah. You
need to ask God, and then it usually is wise when he speaks to you. It always is wise when he speaks to you, but, occasionally you can mishear because you think it's just wisdom. I don't know.
But I think it's funny that this is like what we're talking about, then given the topic of today's stuff. Just I feel like it fits together.
It's true. It'll fit right in later. But first...
Couldn't have made that happen myself. Shoot, dang.
Dad jokes.
Oh, yeah. So I'll go first because Michael Mack looked confused and on the spot, so he's getting his phone ready. But so, did you guys know robots eat guacamole? Do you know?
No.
I didn't know that.
This is already funny, though.
Do you know how robots eat guacamole?
You had me at Fat Pumpkin. I don't know.
With their robotic hands.
With computer chips.
You
gotcha.
All right, I got one that's cutting edge. Are you ready for it?
All right, here we go. Like YWAM.
Why can't you hear a psychiatrist using the bathroom?
I don't know. Why are you listening for a psychiatrist using the bathroom?
That's beyond the point, sir. Now I have to ask the question again.
Okay.
Why can't you hear a psychiatrist using the bathroom?
I don't know.
Why?
Because the P is silent.
Oh, that was
Oh,
good.
man, there it is.
Cutting edge. See it?
There it is.
Although
Wow.
you probably belong in there if you're obsessive compulsively listening for people using the bathroom.
I got one more.
Yeah,
Okay.
right, do it.
What do you call an elephant that doesn't matter?
What?
An irrelevant. Oh man, you're too good. Gotta
That's great.
stop. Gotta
Wow.
stop.
Eat your heart out, Brent. Eat your heart out.
We need the rest of the episode to ponder on those and digest the greatness.
Don't ponder too much about the psychiatrist one though.
All right. You want to introduce our topic today? Mr. Co-host, sir.
I would love to introduce the topic.
Mr. Co-host who has always been the co-host, sir.
Today's topic is dun 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 dun.
One note.
Deconstruction. And so we've brought in an expert. Not really. But someone
For real.
who's been through life and has been through some processes with deconstruction.
Ooh.
So, Michael Lindbergh.
Lindbergh. It's French now.
Yes, it is. It's always been, except for the time that it's Scottish.
It's actually Swedish.
And
Swedish?
The origination of it. But anyways, Michael Lindbergh is going to talk with us about deconstruction. So, do we have questions, or does he just take it away?
I would like
We
to also.
do have questions.
I would also like on the front
Disclaimer.
side disclaimer to say that I don't know, like it's all kind of relative to, like. I mean, as far as what I'm sharing will be relative to like my own experience and not like super conclusive. Like this is all that there is possibly to deconstruction and what somebody might be going through. You know.
All right, so to kick us off, why don't you just give us a description of what deconstruction even means?
Yeah, so deconstruction obviously is like its own word, but typically in today's age when you hear it, you're talking about somebody going through what's called like a spiritual deconstruction. And that, I mean, that could, again, that's a very vague thing and could apply to a bajillion different things. But typically what we, like whenever you hear that in our culture, in our context, you're referring to somebody who was Christian and held to like the Christian belief system and then is like kind of having a breakdown of a lot of things that they once held as truths. And they're kind of doubting a lot and questioning a lot of things and kind of rethinking their belief structure as far as, I don't know, all the things that Christianity talks about and influences, which is most things.
So wouldn't you just... Is that like the same as just straight up walking away from the faith, or is there a difference?
I mean, kind of. It kind of depends on your reasoning, but typically it's been a big thing in today's age, and it tends to be more on like we kind of have focused more in on the journey of that rather than being like somebody walked away from the faith. It's more on like what did that look like and how did that actually progress? And it's been a big thing in today's culture that has been happening. And so people have been sharing a lot more like personal details as far as how their journey goes, and what that looks like for them personally. And people are finding that there's a lot of relatability within that, versus like kind of a general like writing off like, oh, someone just walked away from Jesus. So like in a sense it's the same thing, but it's like a little more in depth typically whenever somebody's talking about it, you know? So it's more of like a personal story that you would get if you like if you see a podcast that says something about deconstruction or something, then it's probably going to be like a personal journey of somebody like walking away from the faith or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So does this deconstruction topic have to do more with someone that is like grown up in the church, grown up with religious understanding, and then they begin to question that and it all goes downhill kind of from there, Phil? Or
I think it's typically like you'll find, so there's this thing called fundamentalism
Uh-huh.
that is like you hold on to these fundamental truths, or there's like kind of generally stated like you're a Christian, for instance, you're a Christian, and so you believe X, Y, and Z, and that's like an agreed upon thing. You don't really question it, and so you would call that fundamentalism. And so people who are fundamentalist tend to be the people who have been raised their whole life and they've been told this certain narrative. And so that tends to be the people that it is. But like I myself wasn't necessarily super specifically raised within a Christian context, like kind of had that leaning because my mom kind of was, but but it wasn't like I didn't go to church growing up very much. Not until like high school did I really get into it. But yeah, so it not necessarily, but typically that's how it goes. And it's more has to do with our culture coming from, like kind of coming out of like a Christian era where like everybody went to church, and if you didn't go to church, then like that was kind of weird. So it's more coming out of the cultural context in like quote unquote a post-Christian culture. So,
well, since you've said post-Christian now, could you just define that for us briefly?
Yeah. So, I mean, that dives into a whole deep, like, philosophical progression of culture, which I recommend Escape from Reason by Francis Schaeffer if you're interested in such things.
It was good. It's a little heady, but it's good.
Yeah. As I feel like would need to be if you were getting into such things.
Yeah.
But anyways, it has more to do with like the culture kind of coming out of like being influenced by Christianity in general. Like there was a lot of rhetoric of like Christian morals and things that was used in like the forming of the country and like a lot of our original documents, and then kind of used to like form the culture as we went, especially out of having the First Great Awakening, which came right after the Revolutionary War, I believe, and then the Second Great Awakening. And they kind of like rose up the general like religious state. And I say religious as in a general thing, not how we necessarily use it today, but like there was a general rise in like people going to church and people like reading their Bibles and doing all the things. And so there was a general like philosophical progression of Christianity that was influencing culture, and you didn't stray too far from that. But as we go, we're finding that we're moving further and further outside of that, and so to where it's a little more widely accepted now that like, we don't necessarily adhere to like biblical morals or anything
as a culture, not as
as a culture,
not as a
specifically.
church.
Yeah, the church is always kind of in its own little bubble. So. And it's hard because these things like touch on so many like deeper generalized things, that it's hard to like define all of the things.
Yeah. Those are a few that I hear pretty commonly when we talk about deconstruction, though, so I figured it might be important.
Yeah, for sure.
But all right, so you were telling us at the beginning that a lot of what you're saying is kind of through the lens of your own personal experience, which is the case for most things in general. But that being said, could you share with us about your personal experience and what was helpful for you and what was not helpful for you in walking through the topic of deconstruction and like kind of having deconstructed your own faith and then building it back up? You just walk us through that process.
Yeah.
With that question, did you know that that's what you were doing, or was it all natural and you were like, oh, this is what has happened?
I did know that's what I was doing.
I
did, because the whole thing that started me on a lot of it was actually listening to people who were also on that journey, and they'd kind of already come up with this language for it. And then, I was intrigued by a lot of their ideas, and so I kind of like just took it on myself. So to get to the general kind of testimony of it, I guess I have to like backtrack and say, kind of give like the foundation for why I considered myself a Christian in the first place. And so when I was like 4th to 6th grade, I went to a Baptist private school, and like accepted Jesus there.
He's
And
making air quotes. With
yeah,
his
there was
fingers.
air quotes there. And I can't even say I remember exactly what that meant. But
the air quotes were accepted or
yeah, accepting Jesus.
okay.
Like, but I that wasn't explained in any kind of like larger context outside of like, hey, Jesus is pretty cool. You should ask him to forgive your sins. Like, and there's just so much more to the gospel than that. But anyways, we'll get to that later. So I accepted Jesus in quotes, and then kind of like I did read my Bible a lot actually. And at that time, they gave me like a kid's Bible. It was like a full-on Bible, but it was like a NIV, like easy read version. And yeah, so anyways, I like just was reading a lot of the Bible and just like really loving it, honestly, and considered myself a Christian on through life in general. Even though like my family didn't go to church really, even at that time they didn't go to church, but like maybe a handful of times my entire childhood that I remember. So there wasn't really this whole huge foundation outside of like, I don't know, I just liked the idea of God and kind of stuck with that. And then in high school, my friend invited me to youth group. And so I went and, I don't know, just found a community of people. And I think this is a key thing, but I found a community of people that like really accepted me with some of the like kind of quirks that I had growing up. Like I had trichotillomania and I pulled my hair out. And so that was kind of this whole like being ostracized from that, like in school and different things. And so I came to this place and made friends that like didn't seem to care about that. And they were like just a really good community. So I went to youth group and stuff, and within that started learning all these things that I was supposed to believe as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we'd read through the Bible and different things, and it'd be like, oh, you shouldn't have sex, you should believe this, that, I don't know, just all the kind of like doctrinal things that we hear.
Eat your prepackaged cheeses 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And whenever you're feeling sad.
Yeah, and so that was kind of happening, but on the side I was still like doing all these things that weren't great. And so like I didn't have much of a personal relationship with Jesus. It was just like a try not to do these specific bad things, you know. And then I end up in this kind of depressed place, being like into self-harm and like cutting and stuff, and then having lots of suicidal thoughts, and even like playing with different things. Like I held a loaded gun to my head once upon a time and was like, oh, I could just do this. And like, I don't know, it, like was just in that headspace a lot. And then it kind of all came to this point where I was just like, oh man, I just can't do this anymore. Like I feel like I'm pretending, and like all of this other different kind of messy stuff happened relationally with people. And yeah, so anyways, it all kind of came to a head this one night, and I was just like, Lord, if you're there, like I need you, and I'm tired of like doing this by myself. Like I'm literally like, whatever you want, if you're there, like I can't keep going forward on my own. And then I heard like what I'm pretty sure is the audible voice of God. Granted, nobody else was there to like reference, but there like was a voice that came and spoke to me and was like, Michael, like I have been here the whole time and I love you. And like just had this back and forth dialogue that was so real that I like, it's insane. It was crazy to me that you could have such an encounter. So anyways, after that long emotional conversation with the Lord, I was like, I'm sold out. Like whatever you want, just tell me. I will go anywhere. I will do anything. Like there was like this initial point of surrender. And as I kind of was talking to people, like nobody else had a reference for this whole thing. And so kind of, yeah, so a while, maybe like within the next week, a friend came back from YWAM. Actually, he did his DTS in, I believe, Cimarron, Colorado. And he like related some experiences that were very similar. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is the thing. And he like, I could see even in him, like in talking to him and / seeing him sharing, like that he was frustrated that people weren't getting this. And I was like, oh, I relate to this. Like, I know, like I've had a similar encounter. And so I talked to him and he was like, dude, you should go to YWAM. Like it's insane. It's going to blow your mind. Like, you'll have more of these experiences. Like, it's going to be great, basically. And so I went. Came, yeah, I guess came here. And this is like fall 2012. So I came here and like, I just found a hope in Jesus. And there was like this greater sense of like what the Lord wanted to do. It wasn't just this minuscule, like, all right, just try to be a good person. There was like this just greater sense of you being a part of a bigger thing and Jesus having dreams for your life.
Yeah.
And in that, I really did find like a personal intimacy with Jesus. And I was like talking to the Lord all the time, and like he was talking to me, and it like blew my mind that the creator of the universe wanted to like converse with me about like normal life things. And so that was really great. And then after that, after my like couple YWAM schools right in a row, I went back home, and it kind of like fell off, right? And I was still trying to do a lot of the religious duties, but I found that I wasn't spending as much personal time with Jesus. Like, I wasn't like hearing the voice of God for myself, to go back to, the YWAM value. And then I came on staff, and I still had a sense of like greater, like I wanted to be a part of missions, and I wanted to do all this like greater vision stuff, but I just was losing that like, here's super close, specific intimacy with Jesus. And during that time, I started filling myself a lot with other ideas and things and listening to a lot of podcasts. And I found this podcast called the Liturgist Podcast. And that kind of led me down this whole road of starting to question things. Like, I knew on the front end that they had some weird beliefs and like questioning some Bible things, but I literally remember actually being in this room and sitting on that couch right there and thinking to myself, like, I have the strength, the like spiritual strength. Like, there's no way I'm going to question the Bible. There's no way I'm going to like question any of these things. Like, you could basically not have a more like rock solid Christian than myself, is what I thought.
That's not prideful at all. It's fine.
Not at all. And so I started listening to these things, and at first I don't know, it just started with like little questioning things, and then they were kind of like growing to like bigger, grander ideas. And different people like Rob Bell and these different people that basically just ended up having really persuasive words, and kind of leading me down this whole path of like questioning the Bible and questioning a lot of the things that I was told are like the basis for Christianity. And so, yeah, I just got into this weird place where I was like, basically like the Bible isn't true in a general sense. Like, I still held on to like a general idea of God and Jesus, but it definitely wasn't anything challenging. It definitely wasn't anything like very like distinct. It was very vague and nuanced, and just like non-specific.
So, would you recommend that podcast at all?
No. No, because well, and
what podcast would you recommend?
The YWAM Nashville podcast.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's the one I would recommend. That and Francis Chan.
Because you're definitely not already listening to it right now.
Oh, man. So I ended up going down this just whole weird road of like questioning things. And it was the weirdest thing because I was here like doing missions, and I was like so frustrated with life. And I had just got married, which like was terrible, and I feel terrible for my wife going through this whole thing.
Getting married was
terrible?
terrible?
I feel like we were supposed to get married, and it was Jesus, but like I then pretty much immediately dove like headlong into all the weirdness as soon as like right after that. And so my whole first year of marriage was like just me wrestling through a lot of this stuff. But basically, I got to this point where I was like, I could probably argue anybody out of their faith, because I realized within that time that people did not have good reasoning for believing things that they claimed to believe, things that they called truth. They just didn't have great reasoning, because I didn't have great reasoning. And here were the arguments that led me to this place of questioning. And so I was kind of coming into this community here like I was probably just sucking life out of the place, honestly, because I was just like, oh, man. Michael Max shaking or nodding.
I actually,
Cody
when
came
I
and visited.
wasn't here, I came and visited during that time, but we didn't really talk about it that much. We basically just played video games the whole time. But around that time too, we would like communicate every once in a while, and he'd be like, "Yeah, Cody, you should check out this podcast.
I'm
It's so crazy."
didn't.
And I was like, I listened to like one episode, and I was like, I mean, if you want to go that way, I guess it's fine. I didn't have an ounce of challenge in me, so there's no way I was going to be like, maybe you're wrong. But I was like, I don't think this is good. But, you know, if you want to go down that road.
Doesn't seem healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, yeah. Now, as a healthier person, I would probably be like, hey, Michael, pull yourself together.
Pull yourself together.
But at the time, I was like, yeah, this is weird, but it's all right. I mean, it'll probably end up being healthy at some point, I'm sure. This is my thought process.
But I found myself in this place of like, at the same time, like just utter despair with all of it though, which like is why I'm so glad you didn't listen to it.
Yeah.
And I led people down that road. Like, I can think of one person in particular that I like influenced towards these things, like pretty hardcore, right? And I was like, oh man, I like coming out of it. I was like, I feel terrible. But anyway, so I found myself in this place, and I found myself like pretty good at like making the arguments and like being able to argue the logic. And so I was like pretty set, and you really couldn't like talk me out of it. I was like, but you can't answer like these questions that like come against these fundamentals that you have, and blah, blah, blah. And I was super set. But after a while, I started, after like probably a few months of being like just about full on like, what's the word, agnostic, whenever like you
You're not
believe in
really
God,
sure.
but it's just kind of like this vague
that's
whatever.
agnostic.
And so, but I was like in this just place of despair, and I was like, oh man, like I don't know, I saw this fork in the road, basically, of like
Spork?
a fork.
Oh, man.
I saw this place
It was only a spork.
of a spork. There was a fork in the road, and there was like left and right, and I couldn't go both ways. And it was like, all right, I either, because I was still like here in the community and like kind of somewhere in me like trying to hold on to Jesus because it had meant a lot to me. And I saw this like just, I was at an impasse, but I was like, I have to move forward. Like life is demanding that I move forward, because I'm like, I can't be in a missions community and be like questioning Jesus. So I'm going to have to like, this is going to make a big difference for like me and my wife and like this community in general, the people that I love. And so I was just in this place of like just hopelessness. And then kind of a couple things. I went to a church service with Surprisa, I think is how you say his name. African dude that's with like Heidi Baker and people.
Mm-hmm.
He came to a church in Nashville and spoke, and he was speaking on like just a whole other level of like spiritual experiences, of like talking to angels and like, I don't know, just all this crazy stuff. And I was like, in my place of wrestling, I was like, this is so far beyond my place of reasoning that it is either utter complete lies or it's completely true. And this guy's like walking in it. The implication of that is I'm missing it, you know, which is a really scary thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that weekend I came back, and I was then talking to Michael Mack here. And Michael Mack said something that like, just like really like punched me in the face. And it was like, when you're in the presence of the Lord, your questions don't matter. And I was like, just like shook on like the deepest foundation, because I was like, man, if I just recognized the truth in that. I was like, if I'm literally sitting with the Lord, my questions about 6-day literal creation, who cares? Like, God can tell me if that's true or not true if he wants to. He doesn't even have to. Like, I'm perfectly fine sitting there at his feet, you know? And so, I don't know, like it, and I felt this like flood of remembrance come in of like like when I first came to YWAM, and I was like, I did talk to the Lord. I did have like actual conversations with the creator of the universe. Why am I not like pressing into that place? You know?
And when you first got saved, you said you heard his literal voice or his audible voice.
Yeah, and so
like, wow.
that whole that whole like first year of being saved, I like just had crazy intimacy with the Lord, and I was like, why did I let go of that? And there was just this kind of realization that I had let go of that, and it had gotten away from me. So I was like, all right, I just need to set everything aside, all of my thoughts wandering, stop listening to anybody else, like podcasts and everything. Don't read any more books. Like, just sit down and like be with the Lord. And so somewhere in there as well, somebody had challenged me to like maybe listen to some podcasts that were like on the conservative Christian side, just to like kind of try and balance things out. And so like right around that same time, I had heard this Francis Chan message where he was literally like, I could find you Bible teachers that will teach you anything. They'll teach you hell doesn't exist. They'll teach you, I don't know, and listed off a bunch of things that I had been like wrestling with and questioning. And he was like, but just read it. Like, just sit down and read it. It's not meant to be that complicated of a thing. Like, God wants to talk to you via this thing. Just read it. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And so like during this time I had of like setting things aside, I was like, all right, I'm just going to like go on walks again and like hang out with the Lord like I used to, and just like talk with the Lord. And then like read the Bible a bunch and just like see. I was like basically like I have to experiment like jumping fully back in and see if I encounter the Lord and that sense of like life and purpose and joy and peace and all the things that come with that again. And then I did. And I like, it was like a complete 180 to where I was like, I like in a sense came back around, and these things basically, to sum up the next like, again, year, it basically all of those things that I had deconstructed that I think were built on sand. Like I now had this realization of like intimacy needs to be the foundation. And from that place, I started like rebuilding these things. And so I ended up coming back around in like greater force than I even had before, with even more sold outness than I had before, because there was like just bad logic and reasons, like bad reasoning for why I believed a lot of the things I believed, not being like birthed out of intimacy and hearing his voice and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's the brief version of like kind of an insane emotional journey, but yeah.
Yeah, I just want to tell the story that I told to Michael that basically that phrase came out of
do it.
What was the phrase you said?
It was like, in the presence of God, like your questions don't matter.
Yeah. So I had a friend that wanted me to like, he was like, I'm on the verge of becoming an atheist. And he was a Christian friend of mine that had been a Christian his whole life. And he was like, yeah, I have all these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all like, you could probably look them up on the internet right now by Google searching top 20 questions an atheist has or something, you know, like it was like all like, if God is real, why does evil exist? You know, like the big ones, you know? And so like, I literally did a bunch of research, you know, like, okay, what are, you know, the things atheists are going to throw at you? And I had really good answers for just about every question you could ask. I mean, I'm not a genius, but there was just like, okay, I think I know God's heart enough to be able to explain some of these things that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
And so I was going on vacation with this guy, me and another Christian friend. And so we prayed a little bit beforehand, knowing that we were going into answering these questions. And I loved this man. I love this guy. So there was no like, I don't want to answer these questions. It was like, I would truly value this man, and I want him to have the answers to all his questions. And then I was spending a little bit of time. Well, I was on this journey of my Christian walk where I was, this might have a little bit to do even with this topic, where I was, as Christians, we often pray with like these like phrases that are like normal prayer phrases, but they don't make sense if you're actually just having a conversation with God.
I've been just doing that this week.
And so I was like, if prayer is just having a conversation with God, why do we throw out all these weird phrases in the midst of our prayers? And so I was like, I want my prayers to be more pure. So I was praying, and it was really challenging, honestly, to like deconstruct my prayer life into just having an actual conversation with God with no, and Father this, and Jesus this, and Jesus this, because why would you say someone's name like 20 times in a sentence, if you're talking to them sitting down? Anyways, I was practicing praying as if I was literally having a conversation with Jesus. And so that was happening in my life. This questioning was happening in my friend's life. And so before I went into this conversation with him, I just prayed, and I was like, God, help me, to answer these questions. Help me to be a good friend. And God spoke to me, which our foundational value was hearing God's voice. And so this is one of the things God spoke this specifically. He said to me, questions won't matter when I show up.
Come on.
And I just like, okay. And I didn't think of that phrase anymore.
The irony.
And and then I go into the conversation with this guy, and I answer all of his questions like a boss. I mean, like, I was impressed with my like answering of the questions, but literally it didn't matter. Like the goodness of my answering of these questions didn't help him one bit. And I was so sad for him. He was also sad because he wanted to believe in Jesus. He wanted to have faith. He wanted to have a relationship with God, and he knew he was supposed to, but he had all these blockages. And so then I was like, do you mind if I just pray? And it was me and another friend sitting around a campfire, and he was like, no, go for it. And the other guy was like, yeah, go. And so I just started praying, but it was praying like this conversational style prayer with Jesus. And like by the end of the moment, I don't know how long I prayed, maybe 5 minutes, maybe more, maybe less. But I was like in tears at the end of this prayer. And I look up, and these two other like grown men were also like weeping. And so there's like 3 grown men around a campfire like weeping. And
sounds like a good time.
And then the one guy who was questioning his faith and going towards atheism, out of his mouth came this phrase, well, I guess questions don't matter when God shows up.
Come on.
And I like almost flipped out of my chair that I was sitting on, like, and so that's just been a testimony. Like, obviously the same phrase is what like shook that in Michael to bring something awake.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about like all the knowledge, all the information we could possibly gather won't really do anything to our spirit. Won't do anything within, it's hard to intellectualize someone into believing the gospel. You can come up with a really good argument, but somebody's going to have an opposing argument like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so the presence of God is what will change somebody. An encounter with the creator of life in your own life is what's going to alter the state of your being, like your spirit inside of you, your heart, your soul, like that's what needs altering, not the information inside your brain. Yeah. And so once you've had that encounter, it's like there's no going back.
Exactly.
I also just want to point out, since we're having the flavor of hearing God's voice, no matter how many times you hear God speak, when like you have tangible evidence, like a confirmation like that, it's always like, God speaks to me. It's like so exciting.
It's true. And it needs.
Were you going to keep going?
Well, I was going to say on that note, something that you mentioned was that your friend like wanted to believe, and I find that most people, it's like a hard thing for them to step away because it's been like such a big part of their identity. Their family probably revolves around these things. Their friends are probably in this circle, and so like it ends up being a difficult thing for a lot of reasons to walk away from this stuff. But like for me, I was like, I think like beyond all of those things, if people were really honest with themselves, like there's this desperation on a spiritual level that you're like you have all this like head knowledge in the way, you have all these like blockages but you're like, there's this thing back there that you want, And so I found that particularly right at the end when I came back around and I was like, oh man, this is the thing. Like I was wrong about all this other stuff. And I felt such like a relief, like this just overwhelming sense of relief, like flood my soul as I was like, oh, like Jesus, it is you. Like you are the answer and you do want me. Like this isn't just a bunch of like vague ideas and concepts, And so I don't know. Anyways, it was just this like crazy moment of like, oh, this is what I've wanted the whole time, but I don't know why this whole process, had to happen necessarily. Or I guess it didn't have to happen, but
I'm being like stirred up right now because I'm like, whoa, like when you get in touch with what you were created for, it's like, it's the best thing that could ever possibly happen,
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to share like just a cool testimony of like right at the end of that. So like I literally had this weekend of like kind of re-engaging with the Lord, and that happened. So I went into that church service on Sunday, and I like came home, and I like had like made up my mind. I think it might have been a couple days before you actually asked me that question or said that phrase of like, whenever you're in the presence, like your questions just don't matter. And so like coming out of that church service, I had like just made up my mind. I was like, I am like I'm just going for Jesus. Like I recognize all these things.
You chose your fork.
Hindsight 2020,
fork time.
Like, yeah, I chose my direction, the fork. I was like, I'm going with Jesus. Like I just recognize that this other way is just death and despair. And so, anyway, so that happened. And then I think on Wednesday after staff meeting, Michael Mack took me aside and was like, just kind of like asking some questions, and was like, hey, like kind of where you at with this stuff? And so I told him that this crazy thing just happened on Sunday. And I was like, I like just felt alive, and I was like a different person, like even in that like moment. And then you were like, you got really excited and you were like, oh, that's great. That's awesome. Like we were praying on Monday about you staffing the school, but we were all like, what the heck? Because you guys had prayed like months prior to that about me staffing a school, but you had felt like it wasn't good and like I shouldn't. And so then this time you were like praying about who was supposed to staff the school, and you felt me, and you were like, you said that guys were like, oh, what the heck? Like we got that he wasn't supposed to do it, a while back. But like it like made sense that, the day before you guys pray about it, like I have this like change where I'm like, I'm alive, and then the next day,
like, okay,
Jesus is like, all right, here we go, and then you guys are like, oh, it all makes sense now. Like, because prior to that, because I was like, man, if you had come and told me that like 2 months ago that I was going to staff a school and I was still in the middle of all of that, I'd have been like, aha, see, the Lord wants this to be the way to go. And that's why he's putting me in this position to counter everything that, and it would have been terrible. It would have been so bad.
Yeah. So on the flip side, in the role that I was playing, so I'm the director and Michael was a staff member.
Maintenance guy.
Yeah. And so we, along with the leadership team, were praying like about who, with also the school leader, we're praying about who should be the staff of this school. And so all along I was feeling that Michael should be the staff of this school. But the school leader was like, I like Michael, but I would not allow him to be the staff of this school because of this, and this, like in his mentality, in his life right now. And I was like, I know of those things, but I feel like God's saying that he's supposed to be. But I respect you as the school leader, and I'm not going to force you to have somebody on your staff that you don't feel good and comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so then it goes forward, and we still had not found a male to staff the school. And so it comes down to like maybe a week before they were supposed to start
I think it was like
training.
2 weeks.
And I was like, I still feel like it's supposed to be Michael Lindbergh. And so I questioned can we bring this back up in prayer? And so we all prayed it through again, and then it was like a yes from everyone across the board. This Michael Lindbergh is supposed to like be the staff of this school, but I need to go ask him these questions. And they were concerning like a few things that he was walking in or carrying that wouldn't have been healthy for him to mentor people in.
Yeah.
And so I sat down with like a list of, I can't remember, like 10 things or something. And I was like, Michael, like, we really believe in you. We want you to staff this school, but there's these like 10 things. And the way I took the conversation, he was like, wow, those 10 things are like the 10 things that God told me that I had to get rid of, like, to move on in life.
Yeah.
And literally, I just made that decision yesterday to get rid of all those things. And like, if you had asked me yesterday if I could be staff of the school, I probably would have not been in the right place to. But today, like, I've gotten rid of all these things, and I'm ready. And so again, hearing God's voice, like, I was hearing that Michael should be a part of this school, even though it was contradictory, like we were talking about,
Common sense.
to common sense as we opened up. So very interesting how God works and how he does things and how he lines things up.
Okay.
So thinking about all of this deconstruction, and I have a little bit of testimony from being in a college setting where basically they were pushing everyone in these college courses. I was in a religion course, and they were pushing everyone to deconstruct everything that they'd ever believed so that they could feed us with some extreme liberal thought and understanding. And so I think their heart was actually really good, because they didn't want me to believe something that wasn't right or wasn't true. And so in that sense, deconstruction has like a cloak of righteousness on, in the sense that it's like, don't believe something that's not good, right, or true.
Yeah.
But there's something lacking, because there's nothing feeding you the good stuff. It's like getting rid of everything. It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And so you're throwing out all of the goodness with like the little ounces of possible badness that might be in your understanding of God, your theology, but it's like throwing all of it out instead of like weeding out the little bits of bad.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to bring that up as a topic of discussion. Something I wrote down was, like, instead of blindly walking out in what you've always been told, that there's a sense that wrestling is good. But does that bring up a discussion in you? Okay, I just want to throw those things out and see what happens, so go for it.
Yeah. Gotta ponder for a moment.
What I was thinking about, and this is something else that I wrote down, is it's like natural versus supernatural. And so there's a natural like deconstruction, and like we were talking about the like mental understanding or informational understanding, or where it's just like on a mental level versus a spirit level.
Yeah.
And so I was like, the natural versus the supernatural, like you want to deconstruct bad beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, you want to deconstruct evil, but if it's not being fed with something good. And so that's what was happening in my college experiences, is like there was all these Christian guys that we started out our freshman year as Christians. And then through this deconstruction process, I saw most of them actually become atheists. And I was like, this is so sad. But what I was noticing about the ones that became atheists is they weren't spending quality time with Jesus. They had no relationship with Jesus outside of those college courses or a church service on Sunday morning. They weren't spending like one-on-one time with Jesus every day, reading their Bibles and praying. Like that was their source of religious understanding, was these deconstructing deconstructional
Yeah.
classes, that were
Yeah.
basically like destroy everything, and their premise was that the Bible isn't like a right source,
Yeah.
that it was written by men and therefore can't be trusted. It
Mhm.
was their premise. So therefore, like, how do you build anything on, you said, sand, sinking sand?
Yeah.
So, for the sake of clarity, if you don't mind, I thought maybe I could rephrase this into a question.
Do it.
So, are any parts of deconstruction good,
The first
and are any parts bad? Like, what would you say put into those categories as far as the topic?
I think deconstruction is definitely not inherently evil. And a lot of people, particularly fundamentalist people, if you had to throw around names, particularly people who lean towards fundamentalism in their thinking, and they will treat people who question things as if they're bad, or as if you're like basically immediately a heretic if you question any of these things. But I definitely don't think Jesus adheres to that. Like you were literally just saying, Jesus had the disciples go through a deconstruction of what it meant to be like in the Jewish faith, but like in their like thoughts about who God was and is,
But they were daily walking in
But they
relationship
were with Jesus.
With Jesus, yeah.
But they were with him, and he was like, it's not this. Let me show you what it is. It's not like dry, dusty, like religious rules and systems.
Dead men's bones.
Exactly. It's relationship. And so you're not like you said, like you're forsaking this bad stuff over here, but then you're just not turning to anything, And so I think that's like a key thing. And I think the reality is like we find we typically need people to go through a deconstruction because a lot of, and this is a whole other thing, but a lot of church culture isn't founded on intimacy with Jesus and kind of misses the whole point of the gospel in like even teaching it the way that they do. It's like, all right, come in, you believe these set beliefs, and then you're good to go. Just say this little prayer and you'll get to heaven. But like, that's not at all what Jesus is talking about. Like Jesus is like, it's relationship. Like, yes, you inherit eternal life. That's great. But like, the point is you're with Jesus though, like you're walking with Jesus even now today. What does that mean? What does that look like? And so that I find that for myself and pretty much all of the like rhetoric that I've heard around this whole deconstruction thing, it comes from this place of like, I've been told to believe this, but now like reason or science or whatever comes in and like shakes those things that I was told to believe. Meanwhile, Jesus is on this whole other plane. Like for the kind of debate is like you have people who've like are on the atheistic side of things, a lot of them having gone through deconstruction, who are like, is there, was the world created in a literal 6 days? And then you have fundamentalists who are like, we need to argue and prove to these people that the earth was created in a literal 6 days. Meanwhile, I think Jesus is on this whole other plane of like, why don't y'all just come out with, like, hang out with me?
Wow.
Like he'll answer the question or he won't. But, instead of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you're operating in intimacy and choosing the tree of life, And so, I don't know. It's just a funny thing. So I think it is actually good in a lot of ways. And a lot of people do come back around, but a lot of people don't. So it's like,
yeah, that's so good. I just want to rephrase what you just said.
Yeah.
To give it a point of emphasis. Like that Adam and Eve chose to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil instead of hanging out with God in the cool of the day.
Yeah.
Which was what they were intended to do, and they were not meant to eat from the...
Yeah.
They were not meant to, like, be the judges or rulers of what was good and evil. They were just meant to hang out with their Creator.
Yeah. Which this gets into the whole gospel thing, but Jesus is like, I only do what I see the Father doing. Like, a father shows his son everything, and a son only does what he sees the Father doing. Like, this is the gospel in a nutshell. And the problem is that's not the gospel people have been told has been represented to people. They've been told it's this certain life philosophy that you just kind of have to adhere to, and then you'll make it through.
Yeah, and so what I was thinking about in our culture today, truth and being real are like super like valued, and they should be. And so that's why deconstruction, I think, has such like a glamorous like appeal to it, is because it starts out with the value of truth being, and it starts out with a value of truth and being real. So it has like righteous, healthy, good roots, but without proper guidance and leading of the Holy Spirit, it's just continues to deconstruct, which deconstruction leads to death or lack thereof.
Yeah. Yep.
Can I speak to underlying philosophy real quick, just to like give people a better chance of success?
Hey, Cody,
like as
can
they're
you
walking
speak
through
to
this
the
with
underlying
Jesus.
philosophy?
Well,
please?
thank you for asking. I don't mind if I do. So I'm not actually a philosopher myself, in case you were wondering. At 22 years old,
Can we
but
call you Collodius?
Collodius the foolish? No, I don't know. Yeah, but codiferous. So yeah, coming back to Escape for Reason, basically the only thing I got out of that was really helpful was kind of back in the earlier days of Christianity. I don't remember all the phraseology he uses, but like we had belief in God, and then we had rationality to go with it. Not the greatest rationality, granted, but there was rationality.
Yeah.
And at some point, we kind of like moved away from believing in God to believing in rationality.
Yeah.
And then, but still trying to hold on to faith within that. So you're like, your belief is in your own logic and no longer in God, but you're still trying to like have your faith involved in that somehow. It's like, yes, my faith is purely rational. There's no like actual faith aspect involved.
Yeah.
So basically, if your belief is in your logic and or someone else's logic that they fed you, instead of in God to begin with, then you're already on a shaky foundation. Like on a philosophical level, you're believing in truth, you're not believing in God. So like there's a subtle difference there, but basically you can still be rational and not have rationality be your God. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, I have reasons I believe this, but I still believe it on faith. Like, I still believe God because he's God, and because I like hold myself to have had a genuine encounter with him, and to have been persuaded by his Spirit that he's real, and not just because I have these rational reasons. It's okay. Mm-hmm. It's good to have rational reasons, and like he calls us to use our minds and like to think. We're not asked to stop thinking. Mm-hmm. But he does also call us to faith, which means we can't trust in our own judgment.
Yeah.
So that was a great realization for me from that book.
And I love philosophy, and there's so many things I can get into. But what you were saying, I feel like Paul sums up as well, who uses a lot of rationale. But like his basis for everything was not wise and persuasive words, but a demonstration of spirit and power. And he talks so much. I mean, aside from Jesus talking and all of the prophets and everybody else, and as we see in the Old Testament across the board, Paul specifically talks about like you being with the Lord, and like that just being the basis for everything. So the problem is that we have tried to use wise and persuasive words, and we have tried to use logic to convince people at the core, rather than like demonstration of spirit and power and being like, hey, you can logic all this out in whatever, but when you encounter the presence of the creator of the universe, you're just not going to care about these questions, and I think that's something to note for my own journey. Like, I have not had all of my questions answered that I had before, but I just don't even really care anymore. You know, like I'm like that's a cool argument if you want to argue it, I guess. But I'm gonna go hang out with Jesus. You know, like it's just much better over here. And I find he normally doesn't want to talk about what I want to talk about, anyways. You know, I'm like, Jesus, what do you think about, you know, the creation of the universe? And he's like, man, did you see that flower? I made that flower. Isn't that flower pretty, like, beautiful? And I'm like,
Yes.
Jesus, stay
I've
on topic. Come on.
I've always thought that mindset was really naive of me to have. But then, like, you read Job, and, like, after all, like, 30 chapters of suffering and, like, asking questions and challenging God,
Oh, man.
like, God finally shows up, and Job is like, I'm sorry I even spoke. I'll keep my mouth shut now. But
He's like, God's like, brace yourself like a man. I will ask you, and you will answer me.
yeah, and
like-
Job's like, I have nothing to say. I'm sorry I ever spoke. And, like,
Oh, man.
God doesn't even answer his questions. He's basically just like, I'm God. And Job's like, okay, I'm good. We're good. We're good.
We're good. Oh, man.
Totally right there with you, man.
Oh,
We're- So what have you learned through the whole process of going through your own personal deconstruction?
There's literally so much. I
Oh,
don't
wow.
even know. I mean, we've already talked. I mean, we've touched on different things. I don't know actually even how to say all the things. But
with words.
I think, thank you. Basically, like, I just realized how much we do anything except, like, be with the Lord, how we, like, tend to all these other things. Like, we'll tend to listen to a good, rousing sermon versus, like, just go spend time with Jesus and these different things. And I think these kind of tendencies are how we get to this place where we're, like, ripe for the picking as far as having a crazy deconstruction goes, because, like, you're doing everything else except for spending time with Jesus. So then you get to this place where something challenging comes up. Say on, like, a cultural level, a lot of what people start deconstruction over, and I'm like, to the point where hearing this narrative annoys me, actually. But it's like, well, if God's loving, how could he send people to hell? If, you know, or about the 6-day creation, or, like, in science says that the world's a bajillion years old, or it always comes down to some, like, doctrinal thing that people.
These were the questions my friend was asking me about atheism.
Exactly. It always comes down, I kid you not, I can't think of a time where it doesn't come down to some sort of doctrinal something, or, like, how could God not like homosexuals or something, you know, like, these different topics that we'd, like, wrestle with and have a hard time with, and we don't have the basis of intimacy to go and ask the question. And so we're forced to, like, try and reconcile these things in our own logic with reality and maybe what the scriptures say, if we even care that much to begin with. And so instead of this kind of dry sense of, like, well, God says that homosexuality isn't okay in these scriptures, I'm just going to throw out the whole thing, at least as, like, an inherent, like, good or bad thing, like, I have to follow this rule book or something. I'll start questioning these things, is kind of just the response, you know, because you're not, like, well grounded in the first place within intimacy. And so, but kind of as I've been, like, going, I've been finding how deep of a root it is that literally even most Christians that I would have said were, like, crazy on fire when I talk to them, the first thing to go is your intimacy with Jesus, right? And so I'm just harping on intimacy, but intimacy is the thing. Like, if at the end of the day you are not, like, having your own personal time with Jesus, and you're talking to him and he's talking to you, and, like, there's this
What we were made for.
literally, then you're, like, missing it. And I realize that people, like, will go from this this fundamental side of, like, don't have sex, don't do drugs, don't do these things that offer some amount of pleasure to us typically. And so they don't have this underlying, like, pleasure from Jesus most of the time. And so turning to these things is not a hard thing, you know, because you don't have that, like, greater sense of, like, oh, I actually have more fulfilling, like, stuff in Jesus. Like, I would never go to those things at this point being close to Jesus, because being with Jesus is way better. You know, like I can't even fathom going back to those things. And so, but if you don't have that underlying thing, whether you've never had it or in your current season in life, you're just skipping your quiet times or something, you know, like then you're just setting yourself up. It's like a domino effect that you're like going to go this direction and end up in some kind of lukewarm place or the full on like atheist kind of thing, you know? So that was one insight I've had / been having recently.
Well, I was just thinking about it and thinking about the scripture out of Revelation 2 or 3 where it says, like, Jesus is speaking to one of the churches and he says, I'd rather you be hot or cold than to be lukewarm, because he'll, like, vomit or spit you out of his mouth if you're lukewarm. Yeah. And so I was thinking about it because I feel like deconstruction is actually active, whereas there's like a whole part of the church that are just either walking blindly, lame, or lukewarm, however you want to phrase it, just complacent.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, God, would you rather someone be in the phase of deconstruction versus not caring at all and just being completely stagnant, lame, complacent, blindly walking through life? Because with deconstruction, at least they're questioning something. At least they're searching for something.
I think another like great analogy for this whole kind of thing and what you're touching on is the parable of the sower as well. Like I realized when I was in Africa and they asked me to teach on the parable of the sower, and I realized that like as I was reading it, I was like, this is literally this. Like people start out like excited and meaning well, and then this happens, or this happens. And like that's the way everybody goes. It's one of these things in some form or fashion. And, you know, only one of those ends up like alive and thriving, you know? And so, I don't know.
Is that the one that talks about the different types of ground or
yeah.
bird coming?
Yeah, it talks about like the birds coming, which is like Satan stealing it away. And then like
weeds choke it up.
Like, yeah, weeds and thorns like choking it out, which I think was like worries and cares of the world or something.
Yeah.
And then there's like rocky soil. One of them
shallow soil.
Yeah, one of them had like money and stuff. But then there was one that fell in like good soil and yeah. So anyways, I just realized
the shallow soil was the sun scorches it and it doesn't have deep roots.
Yeah.
Which I think most closely resembles people who grew up in the church and haven't been challenged. There's like this idea of like the church is a place to insulate people from the world and not a place to like nurture their growth in the Lord and like bring them into more intimacy. It's like you just need to make sure you get your weekly dose of spoon-fed gospel, or else you might walk away from the Lord. But even Jesus himself is like, I would rather you walk away than miss intimacy with me.
Yeah.
But that's not the same narrative that we have from the church right now, which I'm not down on the church. I'm just saying that needs to change.
And so much of like Jesus was like, he was polarizing. He was like, you're either on your face and weeping and want to follow him, or you're trying to throw rocks at him. Like, there wasn't really an in-between ground there.
Yeah.
And so I think one of my biggest takeaways, and something I would say to people is, I don't know, just like take a look at the church culture that literally sets up for this to happen, because we don't have this gospel that actually like makes a difference in people's lives. Like the fact that people can come be complacent at your church means you're not on the same level as Jesus was as far as like what you're teaching and what you're talking about. And something I was kind of thinking about earlier was just like, if your life or your church service or your family or whatever level you're on is not having this effect, like if you're going through your day or through your service or through your whatever, and you're like there's no, like it doesn't make a difference that Jesus isn't showing up and doing things, like then you're probably missing it. Like Jesus wants to come in, be active, be alive, be doing things. The fact that there's a rhetoric within the church that is like does God want to move or not want to move? Does he talk or not talk? Is so utterly ridiculous. Whenever you like encounter the Lord, you're like, why is this a thing? And then the natural progression of logic there is because people aren't there. They're not encountering God. They're not talking to him. They don't know. They don't even know that he wants to talk to them. And I realize it literally always comes down to the individual. Like, you are only responsible for yourself. Like, I'm responsible to be connected and intimate with the Lord. I can't make anybody else be. Like, I can, like, encourage people and talk about it, and, like, testify to what I experience, but ultimately, like, you're responsible for you, you know? So, and, something I've noticed, as far as I think a good thing to generally say, what'll happen is people will deconstruct to a certain point, and they'll be looking for answers, and the church's response, oftentimes you'll hear over and over and over again, is like of judgment and condemnation, rather than like a bringing them in and like, hey, let's like walk through this and be a loving community. And what happens is they'll actually find community, more like better, more wholesome community within atheism, within fellow like deconstructy people, you know. And so,
or just in a
honesty brings
local
intimacy.
golf club.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being
bar.
like, you basically make the decision for them, you know, rather than being like, hey, these are like honest questions you're asking, you know, let's like walk this together, you know.
Instead of, we don't ask those questions, Johnny.
Yeah. It can come out of fear too, though. I've seen, like, I don't really have answers for you to begin with.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid to start asking questions because I don't know what the answers are. So it's easier for me to just write you off as a heretic and stay within my bubble of protection than it is to, like, address you and listen to you and have to wrestle with my own faith, you know?
Yeah.
It's the sense of, like, don't rock the boat. I'm happy where I am.
Yeah.
I've found the amount of Jesus that I'm satisfied with, and I'm okay with that, you know?
Oh, something I wanted to address as well is that people oftentimes are hurt by the church and by some form of fundamentalism, or some belief that's held too strongly, like that they can tend to be like oppressive, or almost like on the level of like being, you know, a cult and stuff like that. And people will come out of these things and they'll write off the whole Jesus thing anyways. But you have to realize, like, that's not Jesus. Like, the Pharisees were clearly missing it, but that doesn't mean that God wasn't there in the first place somewhere and he's not still good, you know? Like, you don't get to just write off the whole God thing because the Pharisees were jerks.
Yeah.
You know? And Jesus doesn't write off, you know, he doesn't okay any such thing. And so I think that is also a big, like, just a narrative I heard a lot. Like, oh, well, my uncle was the pastor and my family was a bunch of jerks. And, like, sometimes that's the reality. But, again, not Jesus. Jesus is different than we are. He's not people like us. He's God.
Any further questions?
My final question is, what should we do about it? What should we do about deconstruction as an idea in the world? What should we do concerning those that we know that might be going down that path? What should we do about it?
And what can we say to someone who is going through it or knows someone who's going through it?
Yeah. So,
Or
or maybe, how about
or what type of popsicle should we give them?
definitely the grape kind.
Wow.
oh, man. Heresy.
Heresy.
Wrong
man.
answer.
Yeah. So, well,
Yellow.
first off, I think, like, if you're somebody who, like, knows somebody, like, don't freak out. Don't. If you know somebody that's going through these things and asking hard questions, like, just talk to them.
Kind of applies to, like, any struggling Christian. It's like, don't freak out. I know he said he thinks he's gay. Don't freak out.
Like,
okay? It's going to be okay.
Like, Jesus is more than capable of taking care of this. They're not beyond hope. And so, like, just figure out, like, come alongside them, like, pray with them, seek the Lord with them.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say to somebody who knows somebody, like, come alongside them, like, don't freak out, pray with them, like, seek the Lord with them and on their behalf, and just really, like, take them in. So often the response is, like, to, like, hold them at a distance and be afraid of them, as if they're going to destroy everything or something. And I don't know. So, yeah, just don't freak out.
And
it'll be okay.
And then if you, from a place of intimacy, feel convicted or challenged by something that they're going through, then bring that back to the Lord, and not even like start your own process of deconstruction, but like construction, like, I don't know what, reinforcing. That's the word I'm looking for. Reinforcing your own faith and letting the Lord walk through those things with you and give you a confidence so you're not even scared to handle other people's doubts.
Well, that's exactly, I think, was what I was trying to do as a leader with Michael here. Is I heard all of his questions. I saw
we had a lot of
the
conversations.
potential, like, downfall, like deconstruction. I saw the deconstruction happening, but it didn't scare me. I actually encouraged him, like, to deconstruct, but also encouraged him, like you were just saying, to build himself up in the Word. And he was you were struggling, if I remember, with the Word itself, with like the Bible, because the church you had been a part of was, like, constantly feeding you the Bible. This is God. Yeah. And so I was like, maybe I can't tell you not to read the Bible, because literally I had experiences where the Bible was such life and, like, food to me eating. So I was never like, don't read your Bible anymore. But it was just trying to encourage you to keep on seeking, but not to be seeking in a way that would not feed your spirit. And so it was like, and then I was just constantly praying for you in that journey as well. And so I think that's, as a friend, pray for your friends. Yeah,
and I think I also want to note with that too, it actually was kind of a funny thing that when I did read the Bible, even though when I, like, sat back and thought about it, I was like, I'm not sure I believe that the Bible is inherently good or we should follow it 100% or whatever. I didn't know. But it's yet somehow still when I read it, like, I was like, but this though, like, it's like a thing that's happening, like, in my heart is on fire,
I remember having these conversations with you.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't really know how accurate the Bible is, but it still moves me and it still makes so much sense, so I don't really know what to do. And I was like, I'll be interested to hear about that when you figure it out.
And so it was actually in the place of when I finally was like, I'm actually just gonna, like, give in to my desire to go after this and then read the Bible more. And I was like, man, this Jesus guy, he's pretty awesome.
What do you know?
But yeah. And then to answer the second part of the question earlier, what would I say to somebody who's walking through it? I would say you gotta go after Jesus. Like, we're telling you, like, Jesus wants to be intimately connected with you, to know you, for you to know him, for it not to be this, like, vague, distant thing. So put yourself in that place. Like, if he is the definition of reality and existence, then you want to hang out with him if you want the truth. And I think that'll be kind of a filter for, like, what is you, like, just wanting things that you want to be true. Like, if you don't want to think that your grandma went to hell because she didn't love Jesus, versus, like, God actually defining your reality. And, so just put yourself in that place and honestly ask yourself, like, am I okay with the creator of the universe being who he is? And, or, like, do I want to be my own God, and am I choosing the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? But we're telling you, but from experience, the presence is so much better. You want that. There's life. There's literally everything that you long for within that, like affirmation, love, peace, joy, all the things there. It's no place that you ought to rather be.
And don't be afraid to hold things as true.
Yeah, that too.
It's kind of frowned upon within our truth is relative society. But if you know the truth, then you have the authority to speak the truth because Jesus gave it to you. So,
and it will set you free.
it will set you free.
And people can't take that away. Like,
Best
I'm like,
believe.
I know Jesus. I talked to him. He's legit. You can't tell me he's not.
I literally heard his voice. I haven't heard an audible voice, but I was speaking from my
I have a handful of times, actually. But that's it.
Good for you.
That's
No,
it.
I'm just kidding.
Cody. Cody.
What?
This is the Lord. If you would stop joking around.
Oh my God.
I was trying to talk to you.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
I have spoken once.
Just got real.
But no more.
My final-ish follow-up question is fundamentalism is fundamentalism inherently evil?
This is a question I've wondered myself.
I was hoping you had a good no, it's not.
I would say on a practical, like practically, those being kind of the same thing. Yes, it doesn't play out well. If you believe something for the sake of believing something and because you were spoon-fed this thing and were told that this is what you should believe, then, like, that's not great. Like, again, it should be born out of intimacy, like the relationship with the Lord. Not that people can't speak things to you, but, like, taking everything back to the Lord and being like, all right, Lord, is this true? Like, I've heard that you're a good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. But I want to know that for myself. Like, I want to experientially know that for myself. Like, I want to know your goodness. I want to know you as a provider, you know? Like, I can't just take and preach God as, like, he wants to provide for me and, like, hold fast to that until I've, like, experienced that within the relationship myself, you know? And so I think from that standpoint, like, pretty much across the board, going after the actual, like, experiential knowledge of God is the way to go, you know, and asking Jesus, like, what he thinks about this, what he is. You know, if he wants to say that he created the earth in 6 literal days to you and wants to reveal that to you, sweet. Like, that's awesome. You now know that because he told you that, and that is a perfectly good basis for believing that. Like, can you necessarily convince everybody else based on that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Depends on if people trust you. But basically, I would say, like, experiential knowledge, everything being based out of intimacy is always going to be better than and more beneficial than, like, you just holding true to vague concepts and ideas that you've been told to.
Yeah.
No.
So my thinking of that, like, your answer to that is that just in the same context that deconstruction isn't inherently evil, neither is fundamentalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's only the wrong ways of functioning within those that makes it evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you identify as a fundamentalist and you're listening, before we lose you, we're not saying that fundamentalists are bad people or that people are going through deconstruction are bad people. Like, in general, especially nowadays, there's, like, a lot of undertones and unspoken ideas that come with isms and ists, and, you know,
Sure.
You're a conservatist, you're a fundamentalist, you're a liberal, you know.
Polygamist.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we say fundamentalist, you may or may not have had that, like, spoken as a reason for hating you, because people do that on Facebook and stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But we're not, like, just because he says he doesn't think it's inherently good doesn't mean that we're joining into the same group and you can be like, oh, yes, you belong in this category now of people that hate me. It's just saying, like, if you are in that place, then all right. But the point is, we don't want to settle in our relationship with Jesus. And if you're just accepting things as true because you've been told they're true by anyone other than out of relationship with God, then that's not good. Not So even aside from fundamentalism, like if you just take the definition of it, like just believing things are true because they're in the Bible or because you've been told that, but you don't have like this understanding like from God, you haven't had a personal revelation of why it's true or like that it is true in yourself, then that's bad. And like, cause we want to keep growing. So just basically don't settle with anything less than intimacy and having that experiential knowledge that Michael's talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's because it's an invitation from the Lord to have that experiential knowledge. So it doesn't have to be this like big scary like, well, I'm not sure actually that I believe these things or whatever. Like it's an invitation to come away with the Lord and like and to get to know him better. If you're like, man, I feel like maybe I don't know Jesus on the same level as so and so, then like you can. It's open. And even more so, like, you know. So I definitely don't want it to be like any kind of condemning kind of like we're speaking this over you as an identity, you know. But it's just like an honest acknowledgement of like, man, I believed a lot of things because I was told to believe them versus like I actually know the Lord.
Well, I was just thinking about, you know, fundamental in the sense that like you, Michael, have fundamental like understanding of intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Intimacy is fundamental to you.
Yep.
Like, and so fundamentalism in itself isn't bad.
Yeah.
It's the not being willing to like, I don't know, deeply research, know, understand. I don't even know if that I'm going to, but even where that scripture that I quoted from Paul, I choose to know nothing except for Jesus Christ and him crucified. Those were two fundamental like phrases.
It's true.
This is fundamental and this is fundamental. Knowing Christ, knowing that he was crucified. Like, and so he was a fundamentalist in that sense. So fundamentalism in itself isn't evil.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
As long as you know why you have those fundamental things in place.
It's like what's that geometry phrase? Is it
Isosceles or
no
rhombus?
It's like things that you assume to be true in order to make other like logical assumptions.
Yeah.
That's
theories?
the kind of fundaments he's talking about.
Yes.
It's not a theorem. It's like Euclid's 10. If you're smarter than me and you know what I'm talking about right now, I'm applauding for you internally.
Look it up.
Please message us.
It's like things that are like prerequisite from like a prerequisite standpoint are
I don't
true.
think that's it. No.
Which, by the way, fundamentalism, yes, isn't inherently bad because one, it's a much more general term than how we use it, and people kind of point it at like conservative Christianity in particular. But like everybody's fundamental. You have to be fundamentalist to even function. Like from a philosophical level, if you actually purely relied on rationale, you would never get anywhere, and you would lay on the floor and wonder if you exist or how you even know anything anyways.
Or if you only relied on like experiential like understanding of Jesus at the same time, I think you would probably become a weirdo.
Probably. So I think that it's like for instance, my kind of take on the whole like thing that seems like a healthier thing is Jesus is like, oh, you read the scriptures because you think that in them you have salvation, but you don't realize that they actually point to me. He's not condemning reading the scriptures, but he's saying like, this is pointing to me. So you can look at like, say, the Bible and be like, oh man, Jesus, I see that you're like this in here. It's an invitation to know you like this myself, you know? I don't just have to like take it at face value necessarily, but it's like, you know, again, just an invitation to the actual thing.
Yeah.
So
you can see a picture and be like, oh man, that's cool. Or you can be like, wow, I want to go there. And then it's like way different thing.
It all touches on so much that I can't, like, there's no way that we could dive into it. It touches on like general church stuff. It talks about historical, like how we got to this place as a society or as a church body. It's literally, there's so much there that it touches on. But I think borderline is like what I hear, pretty much all the rhetoric that I hear around deconstruction is a lot of heady stuff, and isn't like you being with Jesus, and him being like, yeah, maybe the Bible's not true, So
You could also bring in Troy Sherman's theories of like that it's all because, he says sex, but it's all because people are desiring something that is outside the healthy boundaries that God's created. So they're like diffusing all arguments for the existence of God so that they can have their own way.
Yeah. It is often like this place of, I want something that's outside of the bounds of what I hold to be true, and I'm trying to find a reason for me to, in good conscience, go that direction because it's more appealing than where I'm at right now.
The last couple deconstructionists that I've heard from that were at one time like Christian artists or pastors or leaders in the church, like, I'm like, oh, they divorced their wife. Oh, now they're on the path of deconstruction.
Yeah, that I've seen that happen a lot, and that's what I think. Like nothing there was like super rooted in intimacy in the first place. So you didn't have the actual anchor that's an anchor. You had like a pretense anchor that you were like held on to these truths, but there wasn't the actual like, I have a relational anchor in Jesus that gives me the ability to get through X, Y, and Z, or to say no to whatever,
Yep. So this has been a very long and I feel like vibrant episode because we are so passionate about it and like discipling people.
I just hope we got specific enough.
Yeah. That being said, like our whole job here is to disciple people, and like if you like want to talk about this more personally, a lot of this was like us just talking about it. Like we don't rehearse or anything, but so if you just want to talk about it or you have questions,
angry comments.
Yeah. Aside from the questions that we're talking about don't matter and you need to go meet Jesus. But even then, like for any reason whatsoever you want to reach out to us, we're more than happy to talk to you. So you can reach out at podcast@ywamnashville.org. Or
you said that really fast. Could you
podcast@ywamnashville.org? It's podcast@ywamnashville.org. YWAM Nashville.org.
ORG.
.org. For all you boomers out there. Or we
and
also
fundamentalists.
Fundamentalists. No, we love you guys.
We just offend everybody.
And if you have any questions about the base in general, you can reach us at info@ywamnashville.org.
That is info
at
YWAM.org. Nashville.
ORG. Yep. Or you can just leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening on, and we'll hopefully see it soon after you post it.
Yeah.
And so we just love to engage with you on this topic or any other one, but especially this one. Like, I can never turn down someone who's like genuinely seeking to know more about Jesus. So, moving on to fun questions real quick.
Yes, fun questions.
Should we should we go over we're going to do base events first?
The guest telling the host how to run the episode? What is this?
It is fun question.
Can you believe the nerve of this guy? Fun question time. All right, Mr. Guest Michael Lindbergh, sir.
Yes.
What's the grossest thing you ever ate?
Have ever eaten?
Thank you for the clarification.
I was confused there. Had a lot of gross things.
Probably. So
he points at Michael Mack. I didn't know your cooking was that bad.
No, we
just kidding.
We were down in the kitchen once. I think I was in kitchen duty, and I was like making pancakes for breakfast for like everybody, the students and people here. And so I had been doing the dishes, and there was like little floaty pancake bits in the water.
No. Tell me you did.
And he promised me a nice prize that I desired if I took because I was like cleaning out the drain and stuff, and so I took like a handful of it, and he was like, if you eat that, I'll buy you this drink that you really like. And I was like, oh man. And then I was like, well, I can't say no, like this is an exciting moment in life. So I took this gross soapy water pancake bits of sogginess and just popped them in my mouth.
He had to finish it. Like,
Yeah, I
polish it off.
had to like
Oh man.
like fully swallow, but I couldn't do it because I chomped down and just
Are you the
immediately
friend?
Oh yeah,
He was the friend.
yeah, and so just immediately there was like gross pancake water juice, like soapy flavored.
Soapy water, yeah.
Yeah, and it
Oh,
tasted like
man.
soap, and I was like, so I couldn't do it. I tried though. Then I brushed my teeth.
That's worse than mine. What do you got, Michael? Matt?
Grossest thing I've ever eaten.
Yeah.
Whew. I've had some really strange things.
I'm not surprised.
I
College frat
was
boy.
in Thailand and we were to eat, I think it was honeybee larva, and
Delicious.
Sounds
I think it
tasty.
was maybe the mentality more than the
Yeah, they like their
flavor,
butts.
and the texture of it wasn't pleasant either. It was
man.
larva texture, so it's like rubbery and mushy. I don't know how to
Were they
describe
cooked
that.
at least?
No,
Oh man. Were they
Maybe.
alive or dead?
dead, I believe.
Okay,
Maybe
that's
alive.
good. Oh man.
I don't think I
But
could have
either
done it.
way, they were like, "Oh, this is delicacy. Try."
Try.
And I think the guy paid for it, so I was like, all right. Popped it in. And couldn't. I don't even know if I could keep it down. I think I might have had to like turn away after a couple seconds and like hope that the guy didn't see and spit it out. But that was
Oh,
pretty
man.
bad. Ooh, another one just came to mind was squid in squid ink.
What?
I love squid, so that wasn't the issue. It was the squid cooked in squid ink that was bad.
Was it the thought of ink, or what does it taste? Does it taste bad?
Yes, I believe that's the taste was badness. That's a good description.
Badness.
And so, but we ordered it as part of our meal, so we tried to chomp it down. It just was really bad. It tasted.
I mean, it sounds intriguing on the front end, but
It just it tasted like rotten seafood.
oh
so
man,
whatever that tastes like, it wasn't pleasant.
I've made a point not to try rotten seafood before. So,
Anyways, that's mine. You?
Yeah.
Did you go?
I haven't gone. I have had crickets before.
Oh,
It's not that bad. They're like
chocolate
chips.
covered is good.
Yeah, chocolate ones. I had sea salt. It's not so bad. It's the legs that are the hard part. So if you just pick those off, it's basically like a chip
But you
or
can
sunflower
floss
seed.
good with them.
Yeah, you can like rub them together. No, but probably the worst thing, as far as like shock factor, it wasn't that bad at the time, and also my mom was always horrified when I told this story because she's like, "You make it sound like I don't feed you or something," but that wasn't the case. I just am a sugar addict, basically. But anyways, I was like 6, and we went to McDonald's and I got some hotcakes, and then I couldn't finish them all, so we threw them away. And then the next morning, my parents were smokers, so they had emptied the ashtray into the trash can. But I was really hungry, and my mom wouldn't get up. And I remembered that I had had hotcakes the day before.
The hotcakes were calling.
So I opened up the trash can lid, and there they were. So I just dusted off the ashes and popped them right in.
Perfect.
They were just as good as the day
They
before.
were
They
perfect.
tasted a little freezer burned. Turns out cigarette ash tastes like freezer burn. So I've always tasted cigarette ash whenever I eat freezer burned food now.
That's fun.
But other than that, it wasn't that bad.
So
I'm going to be honest.
I thought of maybe a better one to top my other one. So I was at my friend's house, right?
Oh,
And
no.
He's
Oh, man.
he's playing games, and I don't know what I was doing. I was watching or something. Maybe playing guitar. I don't remember. Anyways, I had this monster can, right? And you like close it and like open it up, and I take a big old swig, and I was like, that tastes really funny. I don't know what that was. And then I take another swig, and I'm like, why does that taste weird? And I said something out loud. And then my friend turns around and looks, and he's like, wait, no, did you just get that from here? And I was like, yeah. And then I saw my Monster can where I had said it, and I realized I grabbed his, and he was using his as the spit can for his tobacco.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, man. I was
man.
like, just don't think about it. Just don't, like, I'll just let this moment pass. Just let it go. It's fine. Oh, man. But he freaked out more than I did, and I was like, nope, it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. Just we'll never speak of this again.
Yeah.
And it'll be fine.
Don't tell the elf.
All right. For base events, I don't even know. Is there anything new going on since yesterday?
Well, I don't know what you announced yesterday because I wasn't here, but we
our
are
host
hosting a camp for teenagers called Thunder Camp.
We didn't announce that one yesterday because it was still up in the air as of yesterday. But
And that's happening here the last week of
Camp.
June, first week of July, somewhere.
We'll
there.
give you the whole seat, but you only need the edge.
And I think you can just Google Thunder Camp, and it's put on by some awesome people at Harvest Sound,
Come on.
Nashville.
/ Foundry Church, right?
Sure. They have like 17 names, so.
Okay.
But
Like
they're
City of
like, we
Bangkok.
do ministry with them. They're amazing. And so they're coming up, and we're joining in with them and hosting that camp here. It's teenage arts camp music, going after just a renaissance within Christianity, a
Type
new renaissance
Thing.
mixed with Holy Spirit jam time.
Come on.
I'm sure they would
Sounds
have
awesome.
a different description, but that's mine.
I'm not a
That's
musician, so they're like, we need creative musician volunteers, and I'm like, I'll be back here.
Well, you love young people, so
I do love young people very much. Shout out to my youth group back home. Miss you guys, if any of you are listening.
please listen.
Please, I'm desperate. Yeah, so that's happening. DTSs are still happening.
Oh, yes.
We have one starting this fall,
Woo!
September 20th.
I'm going to be leading this
Yeah, why don't you tell us
DTS.
about it, Mr.
Well,
Leader?
It's kind of been, funny with this whole season of COVID-19 happening and, just like what's happening in the future of
Yeah.
altogether
Anything.
in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's taken us a little while, I think, to get our bearings. Not that we ever really questioned whether we were going to have it. Is kind of just like we're questioning who's supposed to lead it, because
Yeah.
the typical person that we would want to lead it is like kind of in a stage where they're like, I'm not sure I should lead this next one. Something just is telling me maybe it's the Lord, maybe not,
Yeah.
that I should just have another season where I'm not leading it. And so that kind of lent itself to us praying about a different type of leadership. And so I'm actually leading it. And so I'm the base director. And so I'm going to jump into leading DTS. Schools are one of my favorite things on the planet, so that's an absolutely easy thing
the
for me to
best
say
thing
yes
here.
to, although it means a lot of time consumption and maybe like shirking some of my other duties to do it, but I absolutely love it, so
Shirk away.
I will. And what I feel God doing in this next DTS is that I think I'm going to call it a worship and revival DTS.
Oh, come
I
on.
think
Wow.
those are going to be the two
That sounds amazing.
emphases. And so we're going to, because I normally lead the school of worship, and so that's kind of the flavor that I just move with, and awakening is something that we've already talked about in previous podcast episodes, but like those are the things that I live for, is revival, and I love
Come on.
Jesus, so therefore worship. So that's going to be what it's all about.
Come on.
Yeah.
Plus your normal, like, just foundational discipleship stuff.
Yep.
So I'm excited.
Right on. Well, there you have it. An announcement from the man himself. And then, actually, our other DTS leaders here, So there's
Wow.
another discipleship training school starting March 28th.
Oh yeah.
So
That's also going to have a revival flavor for sure,
wow.
because that's just what my wife and I are like all about these days, and just seeing people come alive and just fully step into the dream that God has for them. And so come prepared to go after Jesus, or like we were talking about earlier, you'll probably be pretty uncomfortable, So
if
like-
you want discomfort in Jesus,
so if you want growth, bring it
yeah,
on.
There you go. That's what.
So maybe that'll be the direction of our schools in general is worship and revival. DTSs. That's what we do.
Come on. Yeah, I was gonna say and worship, because worship is such a foundational thing that I love to do. So, like, yeah, I feel like you can't not.
Yeah, and then I'll be here, probably involved in one. of
Cody will
these
be
schools.
staffing one or both of them.
Yeah. Only single male. Woo! Good times. So yeah, and then last episode we invited you to come and participate in lots of different ways. So if you want to reach out to us about coming on staff, doing a school, bringing your youth group or other ministry partnership of some kind, or just visiting, you can definitely do that. Just reach out to us. We'll hook you up.
Yep.
So, yeah, you can email us again at info@ywamnashville.org.
Hey.
And that's right there's gonna be about it.
I just can't wait for the closing song tune.
Oh, it's a song? Oh, that song.
Yeah. I gotta go. I punched it in the throat. Then it stepped on a toad.
What I said I do. What did I do? Let me tell you. I went to the store and I got me a bag of bread and I brought it home. Made some casserole. Why you making casserole out of bread? I don't know. The end.
Cut it before it gets to 2.5 hours. Quick!
Bye, Felicia.
3, 2, 1. Wow.